Irish Life Investment Managers, the country's largest manager of pension and longer-term investment products, is confident of the investment outlook for the year ahead after a strong equities-led outcome in 2017. But it is sizing up new categories of long-term assets in which to invest client funds. And Patrick Burke, Managing Director of ILIM, joins us in studio. Patrick, thanks for coming in. A good outcome for most of your investment products last year, but I suppose that's no surprise. Equities surged ahead on most markets, didn't they?
Yes, good morning, Vincent. They certainly had a strong run again, continuing what's been a long number of years at this stage of positive equity outcomes. Global markets would have seen up to 20% of strong performance, whereas with the strong euro, our clients would have seen that translating to about 10% return in euro terms. Most of our investors typically invested in, we'll say, our MAPS product range, which is a diversification of various different asset classes trying to reduce risk, would have seen returns of 8-9%, which is quite positive returns for any investor at the moment, given where deposit rates are.
I can see your crystal ball there on the desk in front of you. Can that strength of return be repeated in 2018, or are we seeing a more volatile environment?
Well, I think you'd have to expect some more volatility, because volatility has just been so low that you can't expect that to continue. In terms of the strength of returns going forward, well, you do see global growth in a positive framework at the moment. You do see earnings coming out, earnings forecasts looking good and looking strong, and corporates delivering on those. So there are positive signs in the market, but it has been a long run. It certainly has. And while we would expect to see returns being positive, you would expect slightly more volatility next year.
High single digit would be a reasonable objective, would it, in returns?
Mid to high would be, yeah.
Now, we are seeing slow signs of interest rates on the rise, perhaps the return of some inflation, but by and large, it's a low return asset environment for long-term investment other than equities at the moment. That's causing you to look at other categories of potential investment, and you're looking at the whole residential sector.
It certainly has. It's caused us to look at, and you see that in the solutions that we're delivering to our retail clients, quite a diverse range of different asset classes tied in. Even within the equity ranges that we have, we've got drawdown or loss management tools in place to try to protect our customers against downside risks. And yes, when we see alternative asset classes coming in, and we would have over 20% of our typical fund range allocated to alternatives, we would include in that real assets and some illiquidity. We've had commercial property, we've had industrial property, and we're quite open to, and we already have some indirect holdings in the residential space. It's an investable asset class now, more so than it had been historically.
But you are in discussions that could lead to Irish Life Investment Managers getting directly involved in residential developments, including owning the sites, the properties.
Well, while we wouldn't speak about how we're going about doing our business, we're certainly very happy to say that it's an area of strong interest for us. It's an area where we see strong longer-term returns for investors, and a good area for diversification. And yes, if we become involved, we'll be part of the capital provision for solutions that are in that place. And we would hope that that might happen through 2018.
And would that be with specific targeted developers that you would get into partnership with?
Well, it all comes back ultimately to the return that you're looking for. So we're looking for the best available investment opportunities for our clients, putting them within a portfolio where the risk categorization for that portfolio works well, whether that's an element of development risk or whether it's pure rental income. We'd see a mix of that being a possibility. So,
is it more likely that you're looking at the areas, which is a relatively new phenomenon in Ireland, build to rent, that you would actually build properties either in partnership or yourselves for long-term rental tenants?
Yes, correct. And within our parent company, Great-West Life in Canada, I mean, we already operate about 11,000 units over there between Toronto and Vancouver. And here in Ireland, we're indirectly involved. But yes, we would see build to rent as being the next leg of that involvement here in Dublin.
Now, the government is about to outline its new updated 10-year national development plan, much increased capital spending. Would Irish Life Investment Managers be interested, if there were appropriate mechanisms involved, in investing some of your client funds in long-term infrastructure projects?
Yes, suitable investments, very much where you can diversify away from them. And Irish Life have been leading with infrastructure investments for clients over the last, must be close to 5 or 6 or 7 years now at this stage. The infrastructure fund is performing very well. It would have been around 10% return last year for our clients, and it's throwing off some substantial cash, which is good for particularly longer-term investors like defined benefit pension schemes that need cash to match their liability outflows.
That's where you've invested directly yourself, say in energy products or specific buildings. But would you be open today to public-private partnerships in terms of the investment, the infrastructure plan?
As with residential and any other asset class, we remain fully open to any opportunities which look positive and which fit within our framework, and certainly infrastructure does fit within our framework.
Having any conversations with the mandarins over in the Department of Finance yet?
We're always very happy to have any conversations, Vincent, hence the reason we're here this morning.
Okay, Patrick Burke, Managing Director of Irish Life Investment Managers, thanks indeed for joining us this morning. That's it from Breakfast Business with Vincent Wall for this morning. I'll be back with bulletins at 7:30 and 8:30. Coming up after the traffic news, over to Paul and Shane with all the stories of the morning on Newstalk Breakfast. Stay tuned.
Newstalk Traffic and Travel.
Thanks to SunGuard Availability Services. Now launching workplace recovery services in Ireland. SunGuardAS.ie.
It's a damp start in most areas, with wet roads reported in the towns of Longford, Cavan, Tullamore and Ennis. In Dublin, a broken down truck is blocking the left lane of the northbound bore of the Port Tunnel. No major delays to report in the city centre at this stage, while the M50 is moving well in both directions. While in Waterford, traffic lights remain out of action at the junction of College Street and Manor Street. Newstalk Traffic and Travel, with information supplied by the AA.ie.
Newstalk Breakfast.
In association with AIR. Do anything, anywhere with high-speed 4G mobile data coverage across 96% of the population.
This is Newstalk.
Good morning, you're listening to Shane Coleman and Paul Williams. Coming up,
the impact of the gender pay gap over women's lifetimes mean that they earn less, have lower pensions and are at greater risk of poverty when they retire.
the Gender Pay Gap Symposium begins today, aiming to bridge a 13.9% disparity. But will government listen? We'll be speaking to Ivana Bacik.
Also on Newstalk Breakfast this Wednesday morning, the first Cabinet meeting of 2018 takes place today. The referendum timeline is expected to be outlined for the 8th Amendment referendum. And later this morning,
we give out over 20 billion euros every year. We believe that it's not too much to ask people to authenticate who you are so that we can give you a fast and efficient public service to make sure you get what you're entitled to.
Government hits public service cards target with 3 million issued so far. So what next for the controversial ID card?
Arsenal-Chelsea do battle in the Carabao Cup. We'll be looking ahead to that. Before all that, though, here's Michelle McMullen with the morning news headlines.
On 106 to 108 FM and at newstalk.com. This is Newstalk.
It's 7 o'clock. Good morning. The family of murdered prison officer Brian Stack says significant information was withheld by a section of the Gardaí investigating his killing. It claimed the information, which had come from an IRA informant, contained details of those responsible and had been on file in Garda HQ since 1990. Mr Stack's son Austin wants the Taoiseach to demand answers from the Garda Commissioner, and he wants access to all files. Brian Stack was shot in Dublin in March 1983 and died 18 months later. The Cabinet will consider changes to Ireland's abortion laws this morning. Health Minister Simon Harris will present his plans for a referendum, as well as new laws that could be brought in. Newstalk's political correspondent Sean Defoe is going to have all the details on Newstalk Breakfast shortly. Over in the States now, at least 13 people have been killed by mudslides in California. Heavy downpours in communities along the coast have sent boulders and debris rolling down hills. Officials are warning the number of victims is likely to rise. Sheriff Bill Brown from Santa Barbara County has been describing the scene.
It looked like a World War I battlefield. It was literally a carpet of mud and debris everywhere, with huge boulders, rocks, downed trees, power lines.
And thousands of tourists have been trapped by heavy snow in the Alps. Towns and villages in France, Switzerland and Italy have been cut off. In many areas, skiing has been banned because of a risk of avalanches. At home now, the trial of the former Anglo-Irish Bank Chief Executive David Drum begins this morning. Mr Drum faces 2 charges of conspiring to defraud depositors and investors in Anglo-Irish Bank in 2008. The 51-year-old from Skerries in County Dublin also faces one other charge related to the EU Transparency Directive. Solidarity TDs are organising a picket outside the Housing Agency's HQ later in protest at the reappointment of the chairperson, Conor Skehan. Mr Skehan's been under pressure since suggesting that some families may be gaming the system to try and jump the housing list. And finally, over 1,000 budding scientists are hoping to impress on day one of the BT Young Scientist and Technology exhibition later. The President will kick off proceedings